Let's continue our discussion now. Angelo, Fick and Mzwandile Mbeje continue to join us on the program. Angelo, how does the Democratic Alliance project itself then more than just, an opposition in Parliament and, rather appeal to the majority of people that it wants to vote for it, let's say in this coming election?
So one can begin to hear how they want to do this by reminding South Africans that where they govern well. And by governing well, they mean that they don't have qualified audits, that they have clean audits, that they don't have the levels of municipal finance corruption that we see in other municipalities. But at the level of service delivery, I think that it's a mixed picture, because these are not simple places. The spatial dynamics of colonialism and apartheid continue to exist across our cities and towns. And so for different people in cities and towns, and particularly in cities, different levels of service access remain the case, whether you're governed by the DA or not. And we know that the Democratic Alliance has said that, well, it's still better in DA-governed cities like, Cape Town than it is in other cities. But for many South Africans, that cannot be the choice. If you're sitting in Khayelitsha, if you're sitting in, among other things, the townships around and the informal settlements around Hout Bay or around Stellenbosch, you may have very specific needs in relation to your local government and in relation to the provincial government that the DA is not necessarily fulfilling. And comparisons with what would have been your life like had you lived in Orange Farm or had you lived in Diepsloot aren't necessarily helpful to you. And so I think the DA has to move beyond merely comparing itself to the ANC and offer people real alternatives and substantial difference.
And maybe, just before I come to you, Mzwai, then has the DA been able to exploit? A lot has been said about the ANC, the blackouts and the failures of the governing party, but have they been able to exploit the failures of the governing party in order to advance this message and attract what it needs to?
I think one of the challenges that the DA would have, and I think does have and hasn't really fully explored and exploited, is that where they take over from the ANC, the local patronage networks don't disappear when the ANC disappears from government. And that's, I think, one of its challenges. But beyond that, at the level of optics, at the level of language, at the level of, and I don't just mean literally people's languages, but the way in which you speak to people, the DA cannot simply project itself as the ANC in blue garb. It has to project for South Africans a different vision. And so saying things like ending cadre deployment, its words must be matched by its actions. That ordinary South Africans looking to the party are trying to see whether they are in substance difference, not just in style.
Mzwai? Has the DA been able to exploit? In their messaging, for example, or is it just words?
You know what sometimes becomes, I think, difficult for the DA? We hear speaking about, you're hearing them talking about all their successes, but then the ordinary South African will ask themselves a question. Someone like Bongani Baloyi, for example, that Midval municipality that is being spoken about.
Yes.
So it grew under Bongani Baloyi.
Correct.
It was one of their best.
It's doing very well.
Yes. But that very same person leaves. And then the people start to question, what is the problem? We've been looking at many successful young, black, and even white people living who actually are seen to be very strong DA people. Hemen Mashaba, for example, was seen as turning Joburg around. But he, at some point, found that, no, it was not good for him to be in the DA. Then that is the question. So what is it that the DA is not doing or is doing that somehow, even if it projects itself to be doing very well, but some people will feel, well, it was nice to be here, but I have got to go. Where's most of my money today?
We're like a quarter of a way into the century, Angelo, and does the Democratic Alliance need to shed, and you did touch on this, shed some of those old ways? There's a report that you referred me to, that seems to want to keep things a certain way. Am I correct? Does it need to shed some of these old ways then to attract, this voter that it so desperately wants to grow its confidence amongst the masses?
So in historically white universities in South Africa, there used to be a phrase, growing your own timber, which was the idea that you take local black graduates and they become the local academics. And somebody said the problem with this metaphor, which is the problem with many metaphors, is that you grow timber to to cut down the trees in order to make furniture. And so I think for many people looking at those examples given by your colleague around people who were inside the DA and left and not necessarily on good terms, the question is this a situation where they've grown too big for their boots? They've grown to a position where they're not only willing to challenge for leadership positions, but they're challenging the direction in which the party needs to go.
Yeah.
And if those who are really in control of the party are not the leaders that we see who are elected, but other people behind the scenes who are able to say, as it was done in the Leon Coetzee report, we must go back to where it is, our core values. The question is that growth, or is that simply changing, as Steve Biko once said in the 70s, the color of the faces of the people, but not actually the basis on which you proceed?
That's why you seem eager to add.
Very, very eager. Look at how some of the coalitions are failing. It's because once they lead that coalition, so then they say we're holding on to our values, even if it means they clash with some of their coalition partners, and then somehow they collapse. So clearly they need to find a way. Yes, you can still stick to your values, but do accommodate other people, because this is a project. You did not win this project, so how are you able to embrace and bring other people into the picture? If it's your way or either the highway, so at some point it will not work. And I think they need to find a way, particularly when you look at what they do around coalitions. I mean, every party says, well, these ones are arrogant. So what does that mean? It basically talks about that refusal to somehow let go of some of the aspects that will make it a possibility for you to grow.
The constitutional amendments, just taking a look, it seems to calm down hard on internal party discipline. And the aspect also of social media is something that has been raised. How do we view this if we're talking about internal party discipline? And I mean, we just look back to the controversial tweets of Ms. Helen Zille, for example. How do we view this? You know, this coming down hard on internal party discipline, while you have leaders who've left the Democratic Alliance, who've said things about the party which are quite unsavory.
Well, I think it's a problem for any organization, which is this management of the public image of an organization and I think social media is the issue here. When the way in which people can communicate their individual views often clashes with what the organization does. Employers have this, all political parties have this. And so I think this is the DA's corporatist, shall we say, incarnation, which is that the image that is projected must be the right color of blue, it must be the right imaging, the right words, the right spaces. And so we've heard from speakers today, it's from singing from the same hymn book. And this might work for a particular internal conference, and it might work in order to message to the electorate. But again, South Africans, I think, don't want to return to the Thabo Mbeki years where you have people in power who all have to sing from one hymn book or they get kicked out. You cannot have univocality. There does need to be a variety of voices, and there must be dissent. But that dissent can't be as ugly as we've seen it in the past, but it can't be squashed altogether.
But I guess that imaging also comes in where it simply can't be about style and sloganeering, but it actually has to be about the substance of what the party is saying. Mzwandile?
In fact, as part of those constitutional amendments, I mean, I was looking at the debate around the leadership. So there is that view from others that maybe we need to have a deputy. But how they quash that kind of debate, because they feel whoever becomes deputy may feel entitled to be the next leader. So why are you even fearing that possibility? So because you want to grow, you want to open up, you have to change the way of doing things. But if you want to grow, and I mean, as the great philosopher said, I mean, you can't expect different results using the same tactics.
So back on that, Angelo, less sloganeering, less focusing on style, but actually looking at alternative ways in which you're going to be able to sway the potential voter, I guess.
Yes, and that's not a unique challenge for the Democratic Alliance. That is a challenge in post-millennial politics. And it's something that Njabulo Ndebele warned us against as far back as the 1980s, looking at the anti-apartheid struggle and suggesting we can't just pamphleteer the future and sloganeer our politics. And my sense is that what we need from political parties and what the DA has to do is to articulate its vision of the future for South Africa in ways that are not just in terms of, shall we say, catchphrases, and what its material should begin to reveal to ordinary South Africans if it wants them to vote for them, is to signal a South Africa that people can imagine is, one, achievable and in the short term, and speaks to their aspiration and desire. Yes, those bigger issues about fighting corruption, dealing with police and criminality, all of that is necessary. But the kind of country that the DA imagines must match the kind of country ordinary South Africans want, in its visual aspect, in its oral aspect, in its oral aspect, and in its substance. And many South Africans want a vision that isn't just carbon copies of other municipalities where they govern. Economies of scale play a role. You can't upscale from, one small Umgeni municipality to governing the nation. And again, the Western Cape is good in terms of the DA's record, but they need to sell to the rest of South Africa that their vision isn't that everything will look like the Western Cape.
I'm sorry?
And you also look at what they propose. When you're speaking about them in the country, I was quite interested when I saw part of their resolutions when they said they would actually want to walk away from BRICS, given the global...
And how so? That's why there is this unity and growth, and you have the Democratic Alliance calling for South Africa to distance itself from this body.
And then before you come in, Angelo, you look at the global dynamics currently, how they're playing themselves out. There's a debate around the de-dollarization, and then there's that realignment of global politics. And then somehow you feel that body that leads the perceived or real realignment, so we must not be part of that. So I found that quite interesting. I don't know, what did you think?
Well, their statement in their resolution is that it hasn't really served South Africa very well, and so this is a time to revisit it. But the question is, as precisely Mzwandile points out, this realignment in global politics towards a post-imperial, post-American century that we're moving into, this idea that you can simply walk away. The question is, what do you then walk towards? Because, again, it isn't simply a matter of walking away from corruption, walking away from catered deployment, walking away from what you see as useless international and transnational and supranational bodies. It is, what are you walking towards? Because South Africa, we're all in this together. It's all of us together or none of us at all. There's one blue little marble spinning out in this end of space. We need to work together. And so this idea that you simply walk away from BRICS, and many of, this is not a new phenomenon. Many commentators have asked, why is S even in BRICS? That originally BRIC may have included something like Mexico. And South Africa was really chosen for very specific strategic reasons by the other partners. And so it's not a nonsensical idea to walk away from BRICS, but the question is, what is South Africa then walking towards in order to continue to play a role in multinational and transnational changes in the global dynamic that it must be a part of, because no state can go it alone any longer. This is a globalized world.